It was a night like any other in the small, quiet town. 16-year-old Mark sat on the couch flicking through the channels, while his little sister Lucy was upstairs playing with her dolls. Their parents had left just an hour ago for one of their usual business trips, promising to be back in the morning. Mark never thought twice about these trips. They had always been a part of his life. He would stay behind with Lucy and her babysitter Nina, who would come over to watch her. Mark had always had a bit of a crush on Nina. She was a year older and had been in his high school classes, though she always seemed distant, even as friendly as she was. They would talk casually at school, and she was always kind to Lucy, but she had a way of keeping him at arm's length. He never understood why, and it bothered him more than he liked to admit. The doorbell rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. Mark opened it to see Nina standing there, her long black hair framing her pale face, wearing her usual calm smile. "Hey Mark," she greeted, stepping inside. "How's Lucy?" "Upstairs, probably plotting how to take over the world with her dolls," Mark joked. Nina chuckled softly, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Mark shrugged it off. Nina had always been like that, polite, a little mysterious, but mostly just normal. His parents trusted her completely, and so did he. They settled into the evening routine. Nina made dinner, Mark helped Lucy with her bedtime story, and then the three of them sat down to watch a movie. For a while, everything felt comfortable, almost ordinary. But as the night wore on, Mark noticed something odd. Nina seemed on edge, glancing at the windows more often than usual, her smile faltering when she thought he wasn't looking. The tension in the room was subtle, but unmistakable. When Mark finally asked if everything was okay, Nina hesitated before responding. "It's just, the woods have been loud tonight," she said, her voice too casual. "I'm sure it's nothing." Mark frowned, his unease growing. He had lived in this house his whole life, surrounded by thick woods, and never once had he thought to be afraid of them. But now the wind seemed to howl a little louder, the shadows outside stretching a little further. Still, he pushed the feeling away. It was just a normal night, wasn't it? Later that night, Mark lay in bed, unable to sleep. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak and rustle seem amplified. He tossed and turned, trying to shake off the strange tension that had settled over him ever since Nina's comment about the woods. Just as he was starting to doze off, a sound echoed through the house, a low guttural growl followed by the unmistakable thud of something heavy hitting the side of the house. Mark shot up in bed, heart pounding. For a moment he thought he had imagined it, but then there it was again, a deep, throaty snarl, so close it made his blood run cold. He threw off his blankets and bolted out of his room, his mind racing. His first thought was Lucy. She was just down the hall, fast asleep and unaware of the danger. As he reached her door, Nina appeared out of the shadows, her face pale but composed. "Mark," she whispered, "get Lucy and come with me, quickly." Mark didn't ask questions. Something about Nina's tone, the urgency in her normally calm voice, spurred him into action. He scooped up Lucy, who blinked groggily but didn't protest, and followed Nina down the stairs. "What's happening?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Nina didn't answer right away. She was moving fast, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting something, or someone, to break through at any moment. "It's them," she finally said, her voice tight. "The wolves. They found us." Mark froze, confusion swirling with fear. "Wolves? What are you talking about?" Before Nina could answer, the front door rattled violently, the wood groaning under the force of something, or several somethings, throwing themselves against it. "Go now," Nina urged, pushing him toward the back door. "Get to the basement. I'll hold them off." Mark's heart pounded as he grabbed Lucy's hand and ran, not fully understanding what was happening, but trusting Nina's urgency. He had no choice. They made it to the basement just as the front door gave way with a deafening crash. Mark pulled Lucy behind him, holding his breath as he heard growls and snarls fill the house above. The sound of claws scraping across the floorboards made his stomach twist. And then there was silence. For a moment, Mark dared to hope that Nina had somehow managed to fend them off. But when the door to the basement creaked open and a figure appeared at the top of the stairs, Mark's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't Nina. The figure at the top of the stairs was tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the dim light from the hall above. Mark's heart raced as the figure descended slowly, the sound of boots on the stairs sending shivers down his spine. He tightened his grip on Lucy, pushing her further behind him as if his presence alone could protect her. The man stepped into the light and Mark's blood turned to ice. His eyes were wild, glowing faintly in the dimness, and his face was twisted in a snarl that revealed sharp, elongated teeth. But it wasn't the teeth that terrified Mark. It was the fact that the man's face seemed almost familiar, like he had seen it before in his nightmares. Just as the man lunged forward, there was a blur of movement. Nina appeared seemingly out of nowhere, her speed unnaturally fast, and with a snarl of her own, she threw herself at the man. The two collided with a force that made the ground shake. Mark watched in stunned silence as Nina fought the man, her strength and speed unlike anything he had ever seen before. She moved like a predator, her every strike precise and deadly. It was like watching two animals locked in mortal combat. Within moments, Nina had the upper hand. She pinned the man to the ground, her hand wrapped around his throat. For a moment, Mark thought she might kill him, but then she leaned in close, her voice low and dangerous. "Tell your pack they made a mistake," she hissed. "They'll never get him." The man growled something inaudible, and with a final snarl, Nina slammed his head into the ground, knocking him unconscious. She stood, breathing heavily, her eyes wild with an intensity Mark had never seen before. "Nina," Mark whispered, his voice shaking. What just happened? Who are they? Who are you?" For a long moment, Nina didn't answer. She turned toward him, her face unreadable as if she was debating how much to tell him. Finally, she sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "I'm your babysitter," she said softly, though her words were laced with a truth far deeper than they seemed. "But there's a lot more going on than you realize, Mark." He stared at her, his mind racing. "Those men, werewolves, and you're not human, are you?" Nina hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I'm not." Mark felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. His entire life, he had thought Nina was just a quiet, mysterious girl who babysat his sister. But now he was seeing her in a completely different light, one that was terrifying and confusing. "I'll explain everything," Nina said, her voice calm but firm. "But first, we need to get out of here. The wolves know where you are now, and they won't stop until they have you." Mark's heart sank. "Me? What do they want with me?" Nina's eyes darkened. "It's not just about you, Mark. It's who you are." They fled the house, moving quickly through the woods as the howls of the wolves echoed in the distance. Mark carried Lucy, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't begin to comprehend. He kept glancing at Nina, who led the way with an intensity that made it clear she was prepared for something much worse to come. When they finally reached a clearing deep in the woods, Nina stopped and turned to face him. Her expression was grave. "You deserve to know the truth," she said, her voice low but steady. "Your parents have been hiding it from you to protect you, but you need to understand what's happening now." Mark swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. "What truth?" Nina took a deep breath. "Your father, he's the leader of the vampires, one of the most powerful ones alive, and your mother, she wasn't a vampire when you were born, which is why you didn't inherit his powers. You're human, or at least you were." Mark's head spun. "What do you mean, were? What does this have to do with the werewolves?" Nina's face grew darker, more troubled. "The werewolves believe in a prophecy that says the son of a vampire and a mortal, someone like you, will bring about the end of the world if they were ever turned into a vampire. They think if you become a vampire, you'll be the most powerful one ever to exist." Mark's heart pounded in his chest as a word sank in. "So, they're after me because they think I'm some kind of weapon?" Nina nodded. "They want to stop the prophecy from coming true, and your parents have been hiding you all your life, keeping you safe from both vampires and werewolves. That's why they had to leave tonight. They're fighting a war, trying to keep you out of the wolves' hands." Mark stared at her, the weight of all of it crashing down on him. His whole life had been a lie. His parents weren't ordinary people. They were part of some ancient war between supernatural creatures, and he, a normal, clueless teenager, was at the center of it all. "But I'm not a vampire," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet," Nina said softly. "But that's why they want you. They're afraid of what will happen if you are turned." The realization hit him like a freight train. He wasn't safe, not even close. As they walked further into the forest, Mark couldn't help but steal glances at Nina. She had always been a mystery to him, quiet, distant, but kind. Now knowing what she was and what she was protecting him from, his feelings were now even more confused. Part of him felt betrayed, but another part of him felt drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice low. Nina sighed, her eyes focused ahead. "Your parents instructed me not to get close to you. They didn't want me to get involved because they feared the wolves would target you sooner if I did. They thought keeping me distant would protect you." Mark felt a pang of frustration. "So you've been babysitting Lucy this whole time, knowing all of this?" "Yes," Nina admitted. "I've been watching over you both, making sure you were safe. But the wolves found out about you anyway. Your parents knew it was only a matter of time. There was a long silence as they continued to walk, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Mark's mind was reeling from the revelations, but one thought kept nagging at him. Nina had always been there, always protecting him, even when he didn't realize it, and now more than ever he needed her. "You're the only one who can help me, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Nina stopped walking and turned to him, her expression softening. "Yes, I'll protect you, Mark, no matter what happens." For a moment they stood there in the forest, the world around them feeling impossibly large and dangerous. But as their eyes met, Mark felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. Despite everything, he trusted Nina more than he had ever realized, but that trust would soon be tested in ways neither of them could have predicted. The wolves weren't far behind. As night fell, Mark could feel the tension in the air, the distant howls growing louder and more frequent. Nina was on edge, her eyes constantly scanning the trees, her muscles tense as if ready to spring into action at any moment. "We need to keep moving," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're close." Mark nodded, his heart racing. Lucy clung to his hand, her face pale with fear. "What happens if they catch us?" he asked, dreading the answer. Nina's eyes darkened. "If they catch us, they'll kill you. They won't take any chances with the prophecy." A cold chill ran down Mark's spine. He had never felt so helpless, so completely out of control of his own fate. But there was something else, something he couldn't shake, the knowledge that he wasn't safe even if the wolves didn't catch him. The prophecy loomed over him like a shadow, threatening to consume everything. They continued through the forest, the darkness thick and oppressive. Mark's thoughts raced. His parents were out there somewhere, fighting in a war he barely understood, and here he was, caught in the middle of it, with no idea how to protect himself or Lucy. But as they walked, something shifted between him and Nina. Her usual distance had melted away, replaced by something warmer, something protective. She was no longer just a babysitter, she was his protector, his ally, and that connection, fragile as it was, gave him a sliver of hope. But hope wouldn't be enough, not with what was coming. As they neared the edge of the forest, Mark began to feel the weight of exhaustion dragging at his limbs, the constant tension, the fear of being hunted. It was all becoming too much, but then, just as they were about to reach the road that would take them away from the woods, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Mark's heart sank as he recognized the man from earlier, the werewolf who had attacked them at the house. His eyes glowed with a predatory gleam, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. "You can't run from fate, boy," the man growled, his voice low and menacing. "The prophecy will be fulfilled, one way or another." Mark stepped in front of Lucy, shielding her with his body, but the werewolf's gaze was fixed on him. Nina moved to stand beside him, her fangs bared, ready to fight. But then the man's words struck a chord deep inside Mark. Fate, prophecy. He was at the center of it all, and no matter how hard he tried to run, it seemed like there was no escaping what was coming. "I won't let you have him," Nina hissed, her eyes blazing with defiance. The werewolf's smile widened. "It's not up to you." Before Mark could react, the werewolf lunged at him. Nina moved faster than he thought possible, throwing herself between them, but the force of the blow knocked her to the ground, and in that moment, something snapped inside Mark. He was tired of being hunted, tired of being helpless. His whole life he had been protected, hidden away, but now he needed to fight back. "Nina," he shouted, rushing to her side, but as he reached her, the werewolf grabbed him by the collar, lifting him off the ground. "You were never meant to survive this," the werewolf snarled, his breath hot against Mark's face. "But don't worry, boy. You won't live long enough to see the world burn." Mark struggled, his vision blurring as the werewolf's grip tightened around his throat. He could feel the strength fading, his heartbeat slowing. But then, just as the darkness closed in around him, he felt a sharp pain in his neck, sharp and cold like ice. It was Nina. She had bitten him. The world went dark for what felt like an eternity. Mark floated in the void, his mind drifting between consciousness and oblivion. He could feel the life slipping away from him, the cold grip of death pulling him under. But then, slowly something began to change. A warmth spread through his body, chasing away the cold. His heart, which had nearly stopped, began to beat again, stronger than before. His senses sharpened, the world around him coming into focus with a clarity he had never experienced. The first thing he saw was Nina, kneeling beside him, her face pale but filled with relief. Also, to his right, he saw the wolf who attacked him, slumped on the ground next to him, motionless, curious if he did that while unconscious. Her hand was still on his neck, where she had bitten him. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're alive." He sat up slowly, the weight of what had just happened settling over him like a thick fog. He had been dying, he knew that much, but now he felt different, stronger, alive in a way that he hadn't been before. What did you do?" he asked, his voice shaky. Nina looked away, guilt flickering across her face. "I had no choice. If I hadn't turned you, you would have died. The prophecy, it was already in motion." Mark stared at her, his mind reeling. "You bit me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," she admitted, her eyes meeting his. "I turned you into a vampire." The weight of those words hit him like a tidal wave. He was no longer human. He had become the very thing the prophecy had warned him about. The son of a vampire and immortal, transformed into the most powerful vampire the world had ever seen. And now there was no turning back. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, Mark stood, his new vampire senses already adjusting to the world around him. He could hear the heartbeat of every living creature in the forest, smell the faintest trace of blood in the air. But more than that, he could feel the power coursing through him, a power he had never known before. Nina watched him carefully, her expression a mix of fear and hope. "We have to go," she said softly. "The war isn't over and the wolves will come for you again." Mark nodded, his mind still racing. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain: everything had changed. He wasn't just Mark anymore, it was something more, something dangerous. As he walked into the rising sun, hand in hand with Nina, he couldn't help but wonder if the prophecy had been right all along. The world was about to change forever.